Hello everyone, myself Navyata Ravi, working as Assistant Professor in the Department of Cybersecurity and Data Science in MLR Institute of Technology. Today, I am going to discuss about the topic ER model in database management systems. The overview of presentation includes introduction to ER model, components of ER model and mapping cardinalities. So coming to introduction to ER model. ER model stands for Entity Relationship Model, and this was developed by Peter Chen. So it is a high level conceptual data model diagram. What is the purpose of ER model? As I discussed in the previous videos, we have different types of models, object oriented models like that, relational models. So ER model comes under object oriented model, and it is the most popular model to design a structure of a database. So it is high level conceptual data model diagram. It is nothing but a blueprint or a design of a database. So for example, if at all we want to construct a house or else a software, first of all we need to prepare a design. That is what we call as blueprint, right? So according to that blueprint, we used to construct. So in the same manner, if at all we used to construct a database, then we used to prepare a design by using some of the models. So one of the models is nothing but ER model. ER model stands for Entity Relationship Model. It represents real world entities and the relationships between them. ER model, E for entity, R for relation. So this model represents real world entities and relationships between them. So what is the meaning of entity here? Entity is nothing but a real world object that can be either living or non-living thing. A real world object. For example, student is an entity. College is another entity. It is nothing but, these are nothing but the objects which can be living or non-living thing. Student is a living thing. College is a non-living thing, right? So entity is nothing but these are the objects, right, which can be a living or non-living thing. And the relationships among these entities, the ER model represents or real world entities and the relationships between them. And it describes the structure of database with the help of diagram called ER diagram. So here in ER model, we use one kind of diagram. So that diagram is called as ER diagram, Entity Relationship Diagram. So let us see the components of ER diagram. About ER diagram. ER diagram helps you to explain the logical structure of a database. Right, here already we have discussed, we have three levels, right? What are those three levels? Physical level, logical level and view level. Physical level, logical level, view level. Physical level deals with how the data is stored. Right? Logical level deals with what data is stored, what kind of data is stored and the relationships among the data. And view level deals with the interfaces between, the communication between the users and the database among like APIs. And this view level doesn't bother about the implementation details. That means what kind of data is stored in the database or how it is stored in the database, that will be hidden in the view level. So this about ER model and everything belongs to the second level, that is what, logical level or conceptual level. So ER diagrams are translatable into relational tables which allows you to build databases quickly. So here by using the ER diagrammatic representation, we can see the diagram and we can easily translate it into a set of tables, and those tables are called as relations. So if at all we are representing a data in the form of tables, then that data is called as relational data. Right. So by using this diagrammatic representation, we can easily convert these diagrams into relations, nothing but tables. So that if at all we want to retrieve an information or to keep an information into the database, so it will be very easily we can access by using the table representation. right? So here ER diagrams can be used by the database designers as a blueprint for implementing data in a specific software applications. So this is briefly about why we are using ER diagram. Shortly it is also called as ERD. Next, what are the components involved in this ER diagram? Entities, attributes and relationships. These are the three main components involved in ER diagram. So coming to entities. What is an entity? As I said before, entity is nothing but what? Real world object that can be living or non-living thing. Living or non-living thing. For an example, let us consider one entity. That means the data, right? So here a student. This is one entity. This is one entity. College. This is one entity. So what is the purpose of considering these entities? These entities may contain the data. For example, this student entity contain the student name, student roll number, right? Student age and mobile number. Whatever the information related to the student, that will be stored. And that is called as what we call as an entity, which is represented by a rectangle. Next, what is an attribute? Here I am defining each and every component very shortly, and later in the next slides we will discuss them in an elaborated manner, right? So what are the attributes here? The properties of an entity is nothing but an attribute. The properties of an entity. So what are the general properties of a particular student? Nothing but roll number, name, like that, right? So here student is an entity, and what are the properties? Student ID, that's nothing but roll number, student name, mobile number. So these are nothing but what we called as attributes, which represents the properties of a particular entity, right? So we can have any number of attributes for a particular entity. And the group of entities are called as, the group of entities containing similar types of attributes are called as entity sets. That we'll discuss in the later slides. So that's what about the attributes. And what are the relationships? What are the relationships? So if at all we used to relate two entities with each other by using a relationship. Let us see with an example. Let us consider the same example, student and college. These are two different entities. As I said, entities are represented by the rectangles. And what are the attributes here? The properties of a particular entity. So student may contain SID and SName. These are the attributes. College may contain college name and college ID. How can we relate these two entities? That is what we call as relationship. We have to relate a particular entity with each other by using a relationship. And it is represented by the symbol rhombus or diamond. So student study in college. This is what we call as relationship. Student study in college. This is nothing but a relationship, and it is represented by a rhombus or a diamond. So let us see in an elaborated manner what are the entities and types of entities, what are the attributes and the types of attributes, and what are the relationships and the types of relationships. What is an entity? Entity is a real world object that can be either living or non-living thing. It can be a place or a person or an object or an event or any concept which stores the data in a database, and it is represented by what? Rectangle in an ER diagram. So these are some of the examples of the entities. It is a person, that means an employee, or else a student, or else a patient, right? If at all we used to design a database for hospital management system, then we used to maintain entities like patient and doctors. Like that we can create number of entities. So next, an entity can be a place. That means a store, a building, or else a college, like that. And it can be an object, it can be an event, it can be a concept. So any of these can be an entity. Next, what are attributes? Attributes are nothing but what? The properties. Properties of a particular entity as nothing but an attribute. So, entities are represented by means of a properties are nothing but attributes. All attributes have values. Each and every attribute have values. For example, here roll number. Roll number contains a value. For example, 123 is his roll number. That is a particular value of that attribute. Which class? For example, A section or else data science A or else data science B. That is nothing but a value of that particular attribute. Age. So, this is a particular, there is some value, for example, 19 years or else 20. This is a particular value of this particular attribute. So, each and every attribute has particular values. And for example, student entity may have roll number, class and age as an attributes as mentioned in this diagram. Next, coming to relationship. Relationship is represented by diamond shape in ER diagram. As I said, diamond shape in ER diagram or rhombus. It shows the relationship among entities. So, if at all we use to relate two or more entities, that is possible only with the relationship. So, here student study in college. Student may contain attributes student ID, student name and student address. And college may contain attributes college ID and college name. Not these are only the attributes restricted to a particular. You can take any number of attributes. You can consider any number of attributes for a particular entity. It's based upon your interest and your design, your requirements, right? So, next coming to entity set. So, what is an entity set? Entity set is a group of similar kind of entities that can have similar attributes. Similar kind of entities that can have similar attributes. For example, here we can have a number of customers, right? Number of customers containing same type of properties. For example, customer ID, customer name, customer address. Not only the one customer, we have number of customers. So, in the same sense, in the same manner, if at all I used to consider student entity, right? This can be considered as an entity set. Why? Because this is not restricted for only one student. If at all this entity contains number of students, SID, yes name, SID, yes name, right? So, here SID and yes name. These ER diagrams are very much helpful to translate into tables. That is the main cause for preferring ER model. Right. So, here I am representing this ER diagram. By seeing this entity, I am translating it into tables right now. So, here the student entity can be translated into tables in the following format. See, SID is an attribute, SName is another attribute. And here SID, for example, the first student, SName ABC. The name will be ABC. First suppose. And the second one, XYZ. See, here I have considered student as an entity and it is not restricted to only one particular student, and we have n number of students with the same properties. That is what we call as entity set. So, here we have two types of entity sets. What are those? Strong entity set and weak entity set. So, what is strong entity set? Which contains primary key attribute. Which contains primary key attribute. That is what we call as strong entity set. What is the meaning of that one? So, what is primary key attribute? That means, if at all we used to retrieve the data uniquely, then we can say that that attribute is called as primary key attribute. Let us suppose, consider the same example, SID and SName. We have two attributes. So, in these both attributes, what we have to consider as a primary key attribute? As I said, consider the primary key attributes which retrieves the data uniquely. So, here the unique data will be a roll number, ID, and the names can be repeated, right? In real world, unique names must not be there, right? But the roll numbers or else PAN numbers, Aadhaar numbers, for example, social security numbers, these are unique in nature. They must not be repeated. So, those attributes must be considered as primary key attribute. By using that number only, we can able to pick exact data, exact person, whatever we want, right? So, here let us say 1 is my roll number and the name is ABC. right? If at all, I have the second student, roll number contains 2 and his name is also ABC. So, which one can be considered as a unique key attribute now? SID. Why? Because if at all I used to consider this one, I have 2 values having the same name. So, how can I able to gather a particular person? By using this SID only, I can retrieve that particular person, right? So, whatever the things, whatever the values are unique, that attributes can be considered as key attributes. That is the meaning of this one. Strong entity set contains primary key attribute. So, for example, let us consider this one customer. So, this customer contains customer ID, customer name and customer address, right? So, out of these 3, we can consider customer ID as a primary key attribute. Why? Because as I said, ID may not be repeated. We have unique IDs, right? So, this entity set contains the primary key attribute. That's why this is called as strong entity set, right? Now, let us consider this entity loan, right? This contains the attributes loan name and loan date. Several customers can take the same loan at a time and the same date. So, we doesn't uniquely retrieve the data, particular data by considering this attribute, by considering this entity with these attributes, right? So, this entity is called as weak entity, which doesn't contain primary key attribute, right? So, this what we called as weak entity is related to the strong entity and the relationship is called as identifying relationship. Here the relationship is called as identifying relationship. What is the identifying relationship? So, it is nothing but it is a relationship between a strong entity and weak entity. What is a strong entity? If at all an entity set contains primary key attribute, that is called a strong entity. So, what is weak entity? If at all an entity set doesn't contain any primary key attribute, then it is called as weak entity. Thank you.